Imagine your memory of the last 5 minutes is completely wiped clean. You don't remember where you are, who you were talking to, or what you literally just said out loud. Would your opinions actually change? Well, to find out, researchers tested this exact scenario on patients with severe amnesia, people who physically cannot form new explicit memories. In this really fascinating study, they asked these patients to state their opinions and make choices on certain topics. Then, their memory was wiped clean by their condition. They had absolutely zero recollection of the conversation.
So what happens if you argue for a belief and then instantly forget you did it? Well, when tested again, these memoryless patients still align their current attitudes with the past choices they had just forgotten. It turns out our mouth isn't just the speaker playing pre-recorded messages from the brain. The physical act of saying things actually rewrites our beliefs in real time.
Okay, let's dive into this. The methodology here was remarkably straightforward, but the implications are just massive. Step 1, the amnesia patients state an opinion or make a choice. Step 2, the amnesia does what it does, completely wiping the explicit memory of ever having spoken those words. And step 3, even without the conscious memory of the event, their internal beliefs automatically change to match those forgotten words. This absolutely proves that the sheer physical act of expressing an opinion alters who we are, totally independent of our conscious reasoning mind.
Section 1. The biological journey of an opinion.
To understand how this is even possible, we need to trace the exact physical path this takes inside our heads. We're going to map the spine of this phenomenon, following the biological journey of an opinion as it travels through and literally alters the physical structures of your brain. It starts right here, in the medial prefrontal cortex, or the MPFC. In simple English, you can just think of this as the brain's self-thinking region. Whenever you actively speak and formulate an opinion out loud, this area immediately lights up. Your brain is essentially using the act of speaking as proof of your identity. It's logging the data, basically saying, I am actively defending this position, therefore this must be who I truly am.
But the journey doesn't stop in the active thinking part of the brain. Let's see how this builds. With repetition and practice, this newly spoken belief migrates. It shifts away from that conscious, reflective MPFC and settles deep into the basal ganglia. Now, this is the brain's habit center. Once an opinion roots itself here, it no longer requires active thought or debate to maintain. It locks in permanently, functioning just like an automatic habit, like riding a bike or tying your shoes.
Simultaneously, this solidified belief roots deeply into the amygdala. This is your brain's emotional alarm system. Because your brain has now tied this opinion to your core identity, the amygdala sets up a highly sensitive emotional tripwire. It stands guard, ready to fiercely protect this established belief if absolutely anyone dares to challenge it.
And we all know exactly what that tripwire feels like, right? When someone disagrees with this newly minted part of your identity, a violent chemical reaction occurs. Stress chemicals, specifically cortisol and adrenaline, instantly flood your system. Cortisol ramps up your stress, while adrenaline spikes your heart rate. This triggers a literal fight-or-flight response. Tunnel vision sets in, cutting off your ability to process nuance, and reactive aggression begins. Your brain is defending an opinion with the exact same chemical ferocity it would use to defend your physical body from a wild predator.
Section 2. The midpoint twist.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the major revelation it brings. We're bringing the amnesia patients back into the story here, because their experience completely shatters a psychological assumption we've held for decades. See, for a long time, psychologists believed primarily in cognitive dissonance. This is the idea that when your actions contradict your beliefs, you feel an uncomfortable conscious mental struggle and you actively change your beliefs to fix that tension. But the amnesia patients proved the existence of the automaticity pathway. Because they couldn't remember their actions, they couldn't possibly experience that conscious mental struggle. Instead, their belief updating was completely silent, automatic, and totally unconscious. You don't need to consciously debate yourself to change your mind. Your brain updates your beliefs in the background just because you spoke them aloud.
Section 3. The reality check. Limits of the science. Before we go any further, as an enthusiastic explorer of the science, I want to make sure we keep our feet firmly planted on the ground. It's absolutely crucial to acknowledge the boundaries of this research to maintain strict credibility. First, we need to clarify immediately that the brain scans we've discussed are correlational. That means they show a very strong, undeniable link between speaking, brain region activation, and belief changes. However, it doesn't mean we've perfectly mapped the exact mechanical gears of the brain causing this attitude shift. Second, we have to note that these findings aren't universal. For example, studies found that this moral polarization effect completely failed to replicate when people discussed migration topics. So context absolutely matters.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what happens when our beliefs are challenged in the real world. This research breaks down a fascinating dynamic. It shows that it isn't just knowing your attitude that causes arguments. It's the sheer perception of attitude correctness. Just the feeling that your opinion is the purely correct one directly forces you to become highly competitive and aggressive in an argument. When you feel correct, your brain's priority instantly shifts from learning to dominating.
However, there is a notable exception to this trap. Researchers identify certain socially adaptable individuals as high self-monitors. For these people, speaking an opinion publicly is sometimes just playing to the crowd. It's a social chameleon act meant to smooth over interactions. Because they aren't tying the vocalization to their core, private identity, they actually avoid that deep internal cognitive trap altogether. They say the words, but the belief doesn't lock into the habit center.
Section 4. The escape. Overcoming the trap.
So, knowing how easily our words trap our minds and how violently our brain defends those traps, how do we get out? Let's look at actionable, science-backed strategies for de-escalating these intense interpersonal conflicts. The first step is conquering a concept called naive realism. Put simply, this is the deeply flawed, automatic belief that we perceive objective reality absolutely perfectly. Because of naive realism, we're convinced that our highly personal, subjective view is the only objective truth in the room. And the dangerous side effect? It makes anyone who disagrees with us seem completely irrational, biased, or just plain foolish.
This illusion of being perfectly right is heavily fueled by the people around us. Let's look at a neutral example from the research. A debate over a policy requiring obese airline passengers to purchase 2 seats. When participants were told that an overwhelming 86% majority of people agreed with their personal stance, it artificially inflated their feeling of attitude correctness. Being in a social echo chamber feeds naive realism, making us vastly more hostile to the 14% who disagree, simply because we feel backed by the crowd.
So the crucial point is how we frame our arguments when we do engage. The research shows a massive difference between moral advocacy and practical advocacy. When we argue using moral values, focusing strictly on right versus wrong, we immediately trigger outrage, aggression, and that stress chemical flood in both ourselves and the other person. But shifting to practical, cost-benefit reasoning dramatically lowers the threat response. It turns a battle of identities into a solvable puzzle, encouraging open communication instead of a fight-or-flight response.
Section 5. Words create who we are.
As we wrap up, we return to the core, deeply empathetic theme we started with. The physical words we speak don't just echo in the air. They quite literally sculpt our cognitive identity. We're the architects of our own minds, using our voices as the tools. Since our words sculpt our identity, I want to offer you a lifeline for the next time you feel that tunnel vision setting in. First, take a physical breath. This forces the adrenaline and stress chemicals in your system to lower, buying your brain time. Second, intentionally steer the conversation away from moral judgments and focus purely on practical details to keep the amygdala calm. And third, practice cognitive humility. Remind yourself of naive realism and accept that you might not be seeing reality as perfectly as your brain is tricking you into believing.
Understanding the vocalization cognition trap gives us an incredible power over our own development. Your beliefs aren't just things that happen to you. They are heavily influenced by what you choose to vocalize. So I leave you with this final thought. What will you choose to say next? Knowing your own words might permanently rewrite who you are.